Okay, so hi, everybody. Welcome. I thank you so much for attending our program tonight at the library. It's a very important program concerning a new pest, the spotted lanternfly, which became established in parts of New York pretty recently in 2020, I understand. And it was already found in Tompkins County nearby. It's a invasive planthopper that has potential to ruin so many crops, including our beloved grapes of the Finger Lakes wine industry here. So it is my pleasure to introduce Brian Eschenau, Senior Associate from Cornell University, and he will present a program on the spotted lanternfly. And we ask that you please mute your microphones until the very end, and we will have a question and answer session available at the end in the chat box, and Harrison will field those questions for us and present them to Brian. So without further delay, please welcome Brian Eschenau.
Thank you, Monica. I'm going to go into the presentation mode here, and do you see the little boxes at the bottom? Or how does that look to you?
I'm going to actually.
Yep, we just see the slide. We don't see any.
Okay, good. Thank you. I didn't know if it was in presentation mode or not.
I'm trying to reduce my the side screen here.
All right.
So, glad to be here. Yes, a lot has happened in 2020. This is the insect of the evening that we'll be talking about, spotted lanternfly. It has its wings spread there, so it's really brightly colored in that shot. When we see it in nature, we often don't see it with its wings spread, and I'll show you those images as we go along here. But let's talk a little bit about this insect's history and where it's been. So it is an invasive plant hopper. You know, I think it kind of looks like a moth, but it is this group of insects that are called plant hoppers, and they don't chew. They don't have a caterpillar stage that chews. They're actually, they suck juices out of the plant. This one is native to China and Vietnam, and there it's not too big of a problem. They have a lot of predators that keep it in check. Here in the US, there are over 70 plant species that it feeds on that we know so far. We're really concerned about grapes, and I'm going to show you some images on why we're concerned about that and what we've learned from Pennsylvania. It also can be more of a nuisance on hops and apples and some other crops too, including some of our berry crops. But what this insect likes the most is the tree of heaven, and that group of 4 that is there below you. I was in Pennsylvania and I took that shot on a tree of heaven, and so it makes sense for us to look at the tree of heaven a little bit so you can become familiar with it, because when it's in a new area, it's most likely that it will be seen on this tree of heaven, or Ailanthus, as you might have heard of this tree. This is not a tree you would buy in a nursery. It is just an invasive tree that is here through the Finger Lakes. It's often found in urban areas. It self-seeds along railroad tracks. So it's kind of a weedy tree. Here, this is up in Rochester, not too far from the office that I work in when I'm in Rochester. And this is what it looks like later in the season with the seed pods there on the left. And then you can see the leaflets and the big leaf here. So those leaves are often 2 or 3, even up to 4 feet long with all the little leaflets on it. I'll show you that again in a second. And then its bark. So its bark does not have big furrows. This is a maple in the background, and this is an Ailanthus tree. It has more like scales. I almost think it looks like a cantaloupe skin as opposed to a traditional tree bark. There you can see the tree bark right in the center. You can see the seed pods on the right. But let's go over here to the left and take a look at these leaflets that are all on. So this would be called a single leaf. And yeah, that's a yardstick. So these can be really big. And at this time of year, they're just starting to come out. It's not an early one to leaf out. So those leaves that might become 3 feet long at this point are just probably 4 or 5 inches, but they'll be quickly expanding. And then when they do, at the base of those leaflets, if you see these little lobes, that's an indication that this is the tree of heaven or Ailanthus, and not something that looks similar to that, like a black walnut that also has these pinnate leaves with all the little leaflets. So just something to keep your eye out on, because this might be the first plant that it will be seen on, and it was when it was found in Ithaca. And we have this group that is really focused on invasive species. And they have a program that's coming up where they're looking for volunteers, where they'll train you to recognize spotted lanternfly and the tree of heaven. And then you can put those locations of that tree in through your phone, and then they'll appear on a map, and that'll be a place for anyone then to go and scout for spotted lanternfly. And I can put that at the end in there. If you put on New York IMAP invasives tree of heaven in Google, this does come up, but that program is next month. And there's the URL that I could put in the chat a little bit later. So New York imapinvasives.org. And here are a couple of the adults. This was taken in 2020 in Pennsylvania. This is not a Ailanthus tree. At this site that I've been following in Pennsylvania near the state capitol in Harrisburg there, it was just on Ailanthus trees for a couple of years. This past year, it moved away. The numbers were high enough in the Ailanthus that it started to move onto other trees. This is a maple tree. And so there are a couple, and they're pretty easy to see when you're close up. They're polka dotted. So yeah, it's pretty easy to recognize. But take a look at that tree on the right. There's a few that are there, and you kind of have to train your eye to look at it. So believe it or not, this polka dotted insect at a distance is kind of camouflaged into many tree barks. So I put some arrows here. I don't know, you can see how many you can count, but there's at least 4 that I found there in that picture. So they're feeding right there on the bark. And so that's a good reminder when we're looking for this. It's not like it is necessarily that bright orange color right away. You have to take a close look, and sometimes you see it because it's something that's sticking out from the trunk, and you notice that not the smooth edge to the trunk, but something that's sticking out first. So there it was on maple, but this is really what gets us concerned. We'll talk about how it looks different at different times of year. In the late season, it really loves to go on to grapes. And you can see it clustering. It's not feeding on the fruit itself, but it's feeding on the vines. It moves off of trees at that point, feeds on the vines. And sadly, this is the result in one vineyard in Pennsylvania. This happened in more than one vineyard there, where after that late season feeding, then the following spring, when everything else greened up, this vineyard did not. They were dead vines there. So I'm not saying that's going to happen here. We're doing a lot to make sure that that doesn't repeat anywhere in New York and in the Finger Lakes, but it's a good reminder that it's possible. So this is why we're especially concerned about it, and we're really surprised to find it in Ithaca, and we want to know if anybody sees this anywhere around, so we can be on top of it to prevent this kind of damage. And yeah, so you all know, you're from the Finger Lakes, that It's grapes are a really important part of the economy in the Finger Lakes, but we also have the Long Island grape region, the Hudson Valley, and Lake Erie, where they grow the Concord grapes that are used in juices and jellies, and some other areas too. I kind of like this. This map was provided to me by the Wine and Grape Foundation, and it looks like spilled grape juice or wine on the map of New York State. And you may be aware, but New York State has a lot of wineries, 470 to be exact, 900 grape farms that supply to those wineries and other places where they use the juice, a total of over 35,000 acres, and is responsible for a lot of tourism, over 5 million visitors per year. So they estimate about a $6.6 billion direct impact on New York. And this insect has the ability to affect that really important economic impact. So we're doing what we can to help prevent that from happening here. All right, let's go back to the insect now and talk about how this insect does what it does. So this is one of those spotted lanternflies that's flipped upside down late in the season. This happens to be a female. We know that because of the yellow ribs that are there. And that indicates that she's about to lay eggs. So don't always expect the yellow color there. When they're younger adults, they don't have that. But what we're looking at here is this. Can you see this? This is that piercing, sucking mouth part that enables this insect to go through the bark, whether that's the bark of a tree or the bark of a grapevine, and get into the pipework of the tree, the xylem, and pull out some of the juices there, and it processes it through its digestive system, and then the waste product from that comes out the back end. Let's take a look at that here. So it excretes, that waste product is called honeydew, and it's basically a very sugary water. So this is a little video. Hopefully you'll be able to see this over Zoom, and we're going to be taking a look up here and then out here on what these are doing. So this is late in the day. These spotted lanternfly are feeding on the grapevines. You can see they're really not feeding on the fruit itself, but they're weakening the vines and excreting this honeydew. So we're looking for little droplets here. Some of it's coming down here, and you're going to see some from over here to start out with. Do you see that? I've been there, and this one's shooting some out there. I've been in Pennsylvania where there's a lot of spotted lanternfly, and it kind of feels like it's raining when this is happening later in the day. So that is, you know, it's showing how much it's taking out of the grapevine, so it's weakening the grapevines. And when it occurs in the landscape, it's a real nuisance. And here's a shot in the landscape. Now, it doesn't always occur like this, but take a look at that tree just loaded with spotted lanternflies. They like to congregate together, and they sure did that on the trunk of that tree. And so that's a nuisance, not only because you have all these insects there that are flying around, and if you're having a picnic, maybe they're getting into the glasses just inadvertently and becoming a general annoyance. But take a look at the steps on the right-hand side there. That bottom step was cleaned with a power washer. The upper two show that that sticky material that you saw in that little video where it was coming out, it was landing on the steps, and then this fungus called sooty mold starts to grow. You got sugary substance in the environment, something's going to figure out how to eat it. In this case, a fungus called sooty mold normally does, and it has a dark color, as the name implies. And I put these two guys here because they like the honeydew. So honeybees actually will they'll go to the insects that are feeding, and instead of getting nectar, they'll get the honeydew that's coming out of a spotted lanternfly. And some honey in Pennsylvania, where there's a ton of spotted lanternfly is being called spotted lanternfly honey. I think they describe it as an earthy flavor. When I was at a meeting in Pennsylvania, I tried some. It would not be my first choice for a honey, but some of the honey producers are kind of going with it and labeling it as something different. And there's a market for everything, I guess, but there's that. And it also attracts, the sugary substance also attracts yellow jackets as well. Oh, yeah, this is a funny picture. So I was giving a presentation and somebody in the audience said, oh, I was in Pennsylvania in 2019 and my nephew was out in his yard and he was handling it his own way. He was out there with a shop vac and sucking them off of his tree. And so let's see, there's a close-up of the end of his wand from the shop vac. So you can see there's a lot of spotted lanternfly there and he was just sucking them up. Now, if you did that, you would want to empty out that, that container. Hopefully it had a bag inside it to make it easy so that they wouldn't escape back out of the vacuum cleaner there. And they can become a real annoyance. So here they are accumulating together, as I mentioned. The photo on the right is in the Philadelphia area where the populations over the last couple of years has really built up. And the customers started to complain. I don't know if you can see the sign there. It says, please use other door. They directed them around to the side door instead of that main door because so many spotted lanternfly were there. These insects are not a nuisance inside. They don't survive very long inside or without really being able to feed on trees. So, but, you know, it's not very appetizing when you're going in for your burrito to crunch on the spotted lanternfly as you're walking through. And it has received a lot of press, and there has been a campaign to kill it, squash it, smash it, just get rid of it. It's caused quite a stir. When there's so many of them there, it's just a big deal. We're not going to see that in our area. We only have small populations, and hopefully, you're going to see, hopefully we eradicated the one that was in Tompkins County. But in Staten Island, there's a widespread population, and it might be that case this year. And yeah, even in the Philadelphia newspaper, they had to put an article in, don't call 911 to report spotted lanternfly invasions. They actually have a toll-free number in Pennsylvania that Penn State University set up so people can call in to report spotted lanternfly and get some advice on what to do with it. In New York, so far, it's just through an email that you'll be able to report and get information. But this is an important part of the presentation tonight so that we know what happens with this insect through the year, because it really looks like 2 or 3 different insects right now in our area, if there are any here, and hopefully, knock on wood, there are none left in the Finger Lakes, and it was eradicated in Tompkins County. But if it were here, and there's always that possibility, it would be this egg mass. And I'll show you some closer up versions of actual photographs. This is a drawing of it, but of these egg masses. And they're about 2 inches long and about almost an inch wide. But they've already started to hatch in the Philadelphia area. It's predicted that they would hatch probably the first week of June here in New York State, if we have them here. And they come out as these tiny little insects that are about the size of ticks. And those little insects also feed by sucking plant tissue, and they do that mostly on small shrubs and tender growth because they don't have that long needle that can penetrate through bark. So they're doing it on tender material, and they're doing it in leaves up in trees further up along with the new growth. They go through some development stages and they get a little bit bigger. By midsummer, they're a larger black insect. Still, these largely go unnoticed. They can be out there and you might never notice them. Then they develop a red color. That's the last of the stage before they develop wings. And then kind of their transformation, their cocoon, if you want to think of it like that, is just this insect develops kind of a thick shell. It kind of goes opaque, and then a slit forms in the back, and then an adult will come out, and they'll come out, their wings will expand, kind of like a butterfly does when it comes out of a cocoon, although this is just coming out of the immature insect. And that happens sometimes around July, probably for us mid to late July. And then they can survive until the first hard freeze, so up until December. And it was in November that some of the adults were found in the Ithaca area in Tompkins County. And then late in the season, not until September, probably for us, not until October, they'll start laying those egg masses again. And here's a female on top of an egg mass that she's laying. All right, and here is an actual photograph of a couple of females laying those egg masses there. Here are the individual eggs, and hopefully you can see them in a line here. And then she puts this covering, this putty-like covering over top. At first, it's really a light color. Then it develops what I like to think of as like a Bondo pink putty color. And then this was taken in the spring. It cracks over the winter, develops more of a gray color. And here you can see the female did not cover all of the eggs, so some of them are exposed. So each of these is a potential for a new insect to come out. And, you know, one of the questions we get is, well, you know, it's colder up here than Pennsylvania. Can these eggs survive our winters? Unfortunately, they can. They've done studies in Pennsylvania, and they can survive temperatures below zero for months on end. So it's not our cold weather that's going to limit it here, but it might be our growing season. In some years, our growing season may not be long enough for them to get to the point where they can actually lay eggs. They have to feed for a certain amount of time, and we might get our first frost, first killing freeze that kills these insects before they've had a chance to lay eggs. So that's what we're hoping for a good part of New York, and including much of the Finger Lakes. So more on that coming up. But here is, so yeah, there it is on bark. They can lay eggs on anything, and that really makes it dangerous. This is, you know, one of those foldable chairs. It was propped up against the tree for this photograph, but those were all laid on the underside of that that chair. And if that chair then, you know, was in an infested area, let's say in Pennsylvania, and somebody was moving and they brought it up to New York or another uninfested area, and it was left outside, those eggs could hatch in the spring, and we could have a new introduction. And here it is on a fence post. They seem to like rusty metal. So there's so many things that we could find this on. Wheel wells of cars. That's one of the ways that it gets around, and we're concerned about. If you see the egg masses, it's great to scrape those off. Here's just an image of what you might do. And that removes the potential of all of those, you know, probably in that photograph, hundreds of individual insects that might develop out of those 3 or 4 egg masses there. So spotted lanternfly can move on its own, maybe 3 to 4 miles a year. It's not a strong flyer, but it can fly, and it can get up into thermals and move even further. But most of the movement is because they're excellent hitchhikers. Like you saw on that chair, they can lay their eggs on just about any surface, and they like metal, and whatever our cars and trucks and railroads, you know, there's a lot of rusty metal there. So typically they are moved by human activity, and it's really important for us to check anything that's coming out of the quarantine zone for all the life stages. Now, New York, although in 2020 we identified 4 counties where it's located, we don't have a quarantine zone yet, but I understand from agriculture and markets that we will be getting quarantine areas, and there are definitely quarantine areas in Pennsylvania. And I was driving through one of those quarantine areas last summer. And when you take a look, I could see the spotted lanternflies flying through there. This was in August. They were out in full flight. It was late August, as a matter of fact. And there's one right there. I circled it so you can see it there. It was much easier for me to see it because it was moving. But the funny thing is it crawled down here. This was a long light up here. It crawled down between the crack that goes into the trunk, and there it is as I was crawling. So there's a side of it. So we just really have to be aware, especially when we're going through that part of Pennsylvania, that we could potentially bring it along with us. And that has happened. Somebody stopped at an outlet in Pennsylvania and then got home near the Albany area, and sure enough, they had an adult in there. That was in 2019, and it did not result in any infestation, but it just shows the possibility. And that person knew what they were looking for. That opened up their trunk, found it there. But it's believed that it arrived in this area between Harrisburg and Philadelphia on landscaping stone that came from Korea. This insect is not native to Korea, but it was introduced there. It spread throughout Korea, and I didn't know we imported landscape stone, but apparently we do. And there were some egg masses there, and it has spread from there. And so here is the map that we updated at our New York State IPM program at the beginning of this month. And we constantly get updates from different states involved in the infestation. And we'll take a closer look, but here you can see Pennsylvania started out small, and each year it got bigger and bigger, and spread across here. And 2020 was the first year that Ohio had an infestation. There have been some occurrences in parts of North Carolina. These dots just represent where an individual was found, but not a population. The blue indicates, okay, here's an area where we have a population. The red lines indicate a quarantine. We will see some red lines in New York State. Closer up view, we have Orange and Rockland County, Queens and Kings, and Staten Island. Staten Island is really thoroughly infested. Right now, there's not known to be any on Manhattan after extensive surveys, but I was talking to one of the surveyors and was like, you know what, there's a lot of rooftop gardens that we just don't have access to, and they could be up there. But sadly, you can see it slowly expanding. It's probably a matter of time before this area gets infested. We're hoping that our shorter growing season will limit it somewhat in upstate New York and maybe a good amount of the Finger Lakes. So knock on wood for that. So yeah, let's talk about here, Tompkins County. It was found in November of 2020 in Tompkins County. Somebody noticed the egg mass. I think it was an entomology student who knew about spotted lanternfly, saw the egg mass, and this is what it looks like now. They've removed a lot of trees in that area where that was first found, so they're acting very quickly. The advice that we had from Pennsylvania was to act quickly. They did not. When they saw these small areas, they decided to study it and wait and see, and before you know it, it was spread everywhere. It moves pretty quickly out of a small area. So they've taken the stance of removing these trees. They were mostly junk trees anyway. And this is an apartment building. You can see there on the right. And I walked through the parking lot there and saw cars from a dozen states, including states that have spotted lanternfly. So we'll probably never know for sure, but it looks like it may have come through a vehicle that maybe had an egg mass laid on it, and those hatched in the springtime. So some tips, inspect all vehicles coming out of quarantine zones. check your vehicle inside and out. If you see it or anything that you're suspicious of, report it. And let's see, I think I have an arrow here. Well, I will circle it here. If you go to our New York State Spotted Lanternfly website, we have a place to go there. It's right above the map. You'll see the current map, and you'll see this place to click on, and that's a place where you can report it. That goes right to New York State Ag and Markets. You'll get an automated reply immediately. They will then follow up on that. If you have any photos, it's very easy to upload them once you click on this link, and then a form pops up. You enter your information, the location, and any photos if you have them. So if you see something, don't immediately step on it. Take some photos, capture it, because even with the photos, they'll probably want to follow up and see the actual insect to make a positive identification, because right now it's a pretty big deal if we do find one of these in anywhere really in upstate New York. It's also important to know that they don't bite, they don't sting, they are a nuisance for the landscape. You saw what they can do there. They can accumulate, but they don't kill trees. They can, in some cases on maple, cause some branch dieback, but that's not even that common. It's really the grapes that we're most concerned about. So there's the arrow. So if you think you found one, you'll want to click on that, and that gets you right to this form that you can fill out. And so New York State IPM, Spotted Lanternfly, and it gets you to this page. And then over to the right on that same page is insecticides that can be used on Spotted Lanternfly. It's not too important for us to talk about right now because we don't have big populations in this area. But just know that we're posting that there. We're keeping a running list of all the insecticides that are labeled for use in New York State. We have a separate, if you click on that, we have a separate list for our grape growers. So we just want to let you know that we are ready for this. It can be controlled by insecticides. Might not be necessary on a home property, but we do have those resources, and we'll be updating those as more products become available for use in New York State. First, though, and we'll be doing some of this, I've got a colleague, and he and I will be doing some experiments with some of the tree traps. And this is something, if it does become established in our area, that you might want to look at for your home landscape. And you would put these up just at egg hatch, so at this time of year, and it's going to capture the spotted lanternflies that are crawling up the trees. And it works best on the smooth bark trees like the Ailanthus or tree of heaven, but it can work on all of them. It's just if the furrow is too thick on the bark, then they can miss the trap and go up the crack of the bark. And yeah, it's important to remove that late in the season. And we have a cage around this because they're finding that some of these wide sticky bands also captured, sadly, birds such as woodpeckers that are going after the spotted lanternflies that are trapped there. So we want to protect other wildlife. Again, the screen is lifted here to protect that sticky trap. There's one that's sold with that barrier already in place. And then there's this bag trap that's very effective where populations are high. The bag is not here, but the insects crawl up here. They get funneled into this area. And then there's a bag that goes on there that can be emptied. They get into the bag and they still want to go up. Even though there's not a one-way door, it's their instinct to travel up, and they just get stuck in there. And then in a couple of days, they'll die because they're not feeding on the trees that they need to. So as we wrap up here, just talk a little bit about what's happening in New York State. This has been on our radar really since it was found in New York, and each year we've done a little bit more, or since it's been found in Pennsylvania, we've been paying attention to it. And then in 2020, when it was found in New York, we've really ramped up our work. So I work for New York State's Integrated Pest Management Program. I'm helping with some statewide outreach to educators across the state in the extension system, in the invasive species world, in universities and colleges. I'm working with our partners at New York State Ag and Markets. Cornell has an entomology department where they study insects, and a researcher there is looking at biological control. So this happens to be a fungus that is killing this spotted lanternfly. That was occurring in Pennsylvania. They've been able to isolate that fungus, and they're trying to make that natural control a spray that you could put out there in the environment to naturally kill the spotted lanternfly. So that's happening too in isolation labs at Cornell. Our pesticide education management program is very aware of the insecticides that can be used to control. We have grape specialists that we're working with a lot to make sure that our grape growers know how to handle this and know what to look for. And then there's a regional coordination that's happening through Northeastern IPM with all the states that are involved. Just a couple of those fungal pathogens. This is Bavaria and Bacoa, and these are known to affect other insects, but it's also, fortunately, when the weather conditions are right, working on spotted lanternfly as well. So we've got plenty of time for questions or your comments. I would love to hear any of those and provide more information, maybe things that I forgot to say. So feel free to let me know what you're thinking.
All right, it looks like we have one question so far. How big is the insect? I guess relative to other insects, or just on a sort of baseline scale?
Yeah, that's good. And I'm sorry that I didn't point that out. They're about an inch long. So they're pretty big in the insect world. And what you might think of a moth that you might see on your screen door at night, you know, pretty big insect from head to tail.
Someone also said that New York State is a big producer of apples. What is the danger to apples or orchards?
Yeah, that's a good question. And we were more concerned about that early on. And I have some images, I didn't put them in tonight's PowerPoint, of the spotted lanternfly on apple trees, but we're just not seeing mortality. It's not affecting the overall health of the trees. They'll feed on it, but they really don't like to. They'll feed on it maybe for a day and then they'll move on. When they land on grapes, they just stay there for days. So it can occur on them, but it's not a serious concern. I mean, this is what we've learned from, there's some huge grape growing or apple growing regions in Pennsylvania where they have spotted lanternfly. Those orchardists are just not seeing a problem. We thought it was going to be more of a problem on apples and also hops, and we have some new hop growing areas in New York, but yes, it will feed on them, but it doesn't feed on them for very long, and it doesn't cause a significant problem. But very good question.
All right, it looks like we have another question. How did you know when you were in the quarantine area for the spotted lanternfly?
Oh yeah, that is a real, I don't think anyone's asked me that. You don't really know. There should be a sign. You know, we look at that map and there's that red border around it, but there's not a sign along the roadway saying you're now entering a spotted lanternfly, you know, quarantine zone. They are working, you know, to put up some billboards at the New York State border areas. Like if you were in an area to inspect your vehicles, New York State Ag and Markets has done a program where they've pulled over, especially truckers, to inspect the trucks. But you just kind of, you have to know. And there's an educational campaign in Pennsylvania. There's one that's ramping up in New York. But yeah, I'll go back to the map so we can take a look at that. But let's see if I can go back. But yeah, I'll just slide back here to that. Yeah, it's just paying attention to where you might be. You can see it's quite a big area. They say that you're really required to, and truckers for commercial vehicles, they have to have had a training program if they're coming through a quarantine area. They have to show that they have had that. If they're entering New York State, and like I mentioned, they were pulled over just randomly, they have to show on their truck that they've had that training program about spotted lanternfly. And most of the truckers were aware of it and did inspect their trucks. They also have a dog that is trained on the scent of spotted lanternfly, and they were out and they actually found some. This dog kept pointing to the front of a tractor and trailer truck, and there was like, oh, there's nothing there. And then, you know, they got in, they opened up the hood, and in the radiator there was a dead spotted lanternfly. So those scent trained dogs are really good and can pick up even you know, partial spotted lanternfly.
All right, looks like we have a couple more questions. Why were the trees in Ithaca chopped down as a method of controlling the spotted lanternfly?
Yes.
I'm guessing that that question is referencing, like, could there have been another method? And I guess a follow-up to that would be, how was that tree disposed of to prevent any further spread?
Yeah, great questions. We don't want to cut down any tree that we don't have to. But in this case, they spotted a significant number of egg masses. And what we know is if you can see them from the ground, that's only 20% of the egg masses. 80% are above 2 meters in height, so about 12 feet. 80% of them are above that 12 feet where it's really difficult to see them. So they were up in the branches. There was no way to tell how many were there without removing those trees. And when they brought the trees down, they inspected the branches. So there's a lot of effort involved there. And then they chipped them up. They found that the egg masses don't survive chipping. And they put the branches and they did the chipping in an enclosed, in a designated area. So they really thought through the whole process. And was there another part of that? Oh, yeah. The other possibility would be to use an insecticide. And it's really difficult to get good control well up into the tree canopy, and with the possibility of drift. And that's a really active area. When I was there, even on a weekend, there were a lot of students walking by. So we're really concerned about the use of pesticide in that area. There are some systemic pesticides that can be injected into trees, and that is a good option that is relatively safe. But it's not the right time of year to do that. The eggs would have been able to hatch, and those little spotted lanternflies would have been able to spread before the insecticide would have taken hold in those trees if they use a systemic.
All right, it looks like the next question is, did they damage or cause any harm to berry crops such as blueberries or raspberries?
They will feed on raspberries, especially. I haven't heard about blueberries, but raspberries they like when they're young, but it doesn't seem to inhibit the yield. They're not there at the end of the season when they're adults, so not a significant problem. Could you find them there in early summer if you had an area where there were spotted lanternflies? Yes, but probably no impact to the crop.
All right, we have an interesting question. What do the
I like those.
lanternflies smell like, or do they have a sort of distinct scent?
Do they have a distinct scent? Huh. You know, I haven't noticed that. When they are killed in large numbers and decaying, it's just a bad scent to them. I think, you know, the dogs that are trained to pick it up, you know, the dogs their noses are so much more sensitive to ours that they're picking up things that we can't even smell. So when I've been around spotted lanternfly, I haven't noticed any particular scent, but the dogs, they're picking up something there. Was that the whole question there? Or?
Yeah, that was the whole question.
Okay.
If we have any other questions, we welcome you to put those in the chat box below. I'm not seeing any others at the moment, but I guess we'll give that a couple of moments and see if there's any others.
Please be on the lookout for spotted lanternfly this year. Go down to the end there.
All right, that looks like all the questions. I'll turn it back over to Monica.
Okay, thank you. I'm unmuted, correct? Yeah, I'm not seeing any other questions. So thank you, Harrison, so much.
I see somebody has their hand up. I don't know if that was an accident on that iPhone.
No, I'm not seeing anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to tell everybody that we are recording this program. It is recorded, and we will put it on our website so you can view it. I'm sorry? I thought somebody had a question.
Did they? Yeah.
No, so we will have it on our website, and we can watch it again, and you can tell other people about it, and they can watch it and keep a lookout for this really dangerous crop killer. So I really appreciate all of your expertise and your wonderful explanation of everything. Brian, thank you for your time. I appreciate
to do it. Glad to have other eyes out there trying to look for this.
Right, and we are working on a oral history project to document wineries and owners and vineyard managers. So it's so important that people be on the lookout for this. And I had no idea that they are hitchhikers, as you pointed out. So I thank you again for that bit of information as well, Brian. Thank you for your time. And I appreciate all of your help in this matter. Thank you.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
All righty. Bye-bye.